And welcome back. So in prep for getting back to our engine and doing our more of our assembly, I'm gonna go ahead and get our timing cover cleaned up here, or aka pretty much the front cover of the motor that all your accessories bolt on, even though they call it a timing cover. Again, a big old thick piece of aluminum. Of course, this is the area here in which the water pump mounts. So we're just gonna, clean up the residual goo and some of the corrosion deposits you see here. The new water pump did come with a replacement gasket. We do have a new gasket for the back of the timing cover, as well as once we get this cleaned up, we're going to go ahead and install a new crankshaft seal. Just went with a Timken seal on this one. That's the part number. Again, comes up for a 5.7 Hemi of a 2.9 vintage. It's probably the same seal for other 5.7s, and it may even be the same seal for 6.4, but again, always verify your part numbers. We're going to go ahead and install this. I just got a Timken one because that's the seal that we used on the 6.4 timing cover, and it was fine. So we've got our two install seal tools. This one we'll use when we put the seal on there, just drive it flush with the cover. But you'll notice this seal, just like on the 6.4, actually sits slightly below the surface of the cover. And if we look at the back of this, the back lip, and it's probably going to be almost impossible to see it, but the back lip of the seal rests against the bottom of the cover. So what we have to do is make sure that when we drive the new seal in, that we drive it in far enough and not just leave it flush with the top cover. When we did the 6.4, that's where this came into play. So this is just a little piece of wood that we've trimmed down, and you can see, just like on the 6.4, it fits in there fine. It'll fit on that outer race of that seal and allow us to continue to drive that in until we get it to seat to the bottom. So that's kind of interesting. So that is, at least size-wise, pretty much the same seal that was in the 6.4 cover. So that's what we're going to work on next. We're just going to work on kind of getting this wiped down, getting it cleaned up, and just being mindful of the areas for our timing cover bolts. Again, we've got these two bolts here. These two bolts on the corner here were timing cover bolts, and of course these two here. So 2, 4, 6 bolts make up the timing cover. If you remember, this one was missing when we took it apart. We have since ordered and received that bolt, and I'm going to do a follow-up video, follow-up parts video, to show some of the parts that have come in since we did the first parts and part number video, just so individuals kind of have that information. But again, rest assured, we did buy a replacement bolt to replace that missing one. This is what we're going to crack on next. I'm going to get this cleaned up, and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see we ran some degreaser over our timing cover. Looks a little bit better than what it did. It's not 100% clean, but again, I don't have a parts washer. Trust me, if I had a parts washer, I'd soak it in the parts washer first. But it's a far cry better than what it was, which is our goal. Just getting some seal install tools here. If you remember these, if you watched our 6.4 series, we did the upgrade. We made a couple of wooden blocks and shaved down a corner on this board to specifically install this front timing cover seal. And the interesting enough, I think this may be the same size seal for the 6.4 and the 5.7, because the tools that we made to install it fit across exactly. But with that being said, let me show you this part number. That's what we're getting ready to reinstall. It's a Timken seal. I just went with Timken because we used that on the 6.4 and it worked fine. And truth be told, from what I've heard from a lot of individuals, these front timing seals rarely, if ever, have a problem. But we're changing this one out again because we're here. We're taking advantage of the opportunity. The old one we took out looked like it was pretty much the original one that came with the truck. The inner sealing surface was getting to be pretty stiff and looked to be pretty brittle, starting to become pretty brittle. So this seal specifically, the book states that when you install it into the bore here, it must be installed dry. So they don't want you putting any lubrication on the outside of this. And then when you go to install your front crankshaft or your harmonic balancer, whatever you want to call it, they also don't want you putting any oil on the inside lip of that seal either. I'm sure they got the reasons for it, but that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, there's a special tool, obviously, that you can buy where you can do this while actually it's still installed in the front of the motor, and it threads into the crankshaft and pushes on this seal so you can push a new one in place. But what we're going to do is we're going to do like we did with the 6.4. So we've got our area here dry, doesn't have any oil in it, and this paper part of the seal faces down. I like to usually just kind of push on them by hand and get them started, like you see there. Now I'm going to leave this protective center, which is kind of holding our outer seal in shape, or inner seal in shape, but I am going to push it just so it's flat with the seal. But I'm going to leave it in there until we're ready to install the timing cover, then we'll remove it. Now once that seal is started, we're just going to take our wood block like we did before. Now you should hear this tone change between now and when this wooden block makes contact with the front timing cover. Hopefully you can hear that. We're just going to tap around it. Sorry for the loud noise. There we go. Now, this seal, if you remember when we shot before we cleaned it up, the previous seal, this seal actually sits down inside. It's not flush with the top of the cover, and hopefully we can get a good shot of the back of this. You should be able to see that there's a little bit of a gap between the bottom of the seal and the bottom of the timing cover, and that's what we need to fix next. So it's not quite seated all the way. That's where our second highly technical install seal tool comes from. If you remember, this was just a piece of lumber that we shaved the corners down off and just kind of rounded the corners a bit. And what it will do is you'll see it will fit on the outside lip of that seal. So what I like to do is just kind of come in here like this, making sure I'm on that outer lip, and then turn it. There we go. You can kind of hear that tone change as well when that seal bottoms out in that bore. Just keep turning it a little bit by a little bit, making sure that we're just kind of going around it, that we've got it all seated. Okay, that should do it. See that we're sitting below the face of our timing cover now. Probably not going to be able to see this part of it very well, but you should see that that bottom of that seal is now at the bottom of that bore. It's kind of hard to get in there and see it. But that is it. That is our front crankshaft seal installed. As you saw, it's not too terrible. I will push this plastic protection piece up a little bit just so it's not on the verge of falling out on us. But there we go, perfect. And like I said, we'll take this off when we go to install it on the front of the motor, because obviously the what's left of the crankshaft at the bottom pulley mounts to has got to come through there. But yeah, that's it. I'm going to show you that part number once again. Again, it's just a Timken seal. And just to reiterate, per the manual, as you saw, they don't want any oil on the outside of the seal when you drive it in, and they don't want any oil on the inside of that lip when you go to put that pulley in place. They just want everything cleaned up with no debris, no sand, no grit or anything when you go to install that bottom pulley, so that way it doesn't damage the bore in the pulley or the crankshaft, and just kind of drive it home. But I'll show you all that again when we bring you back. But in the next section of this video, we're going to start cleaning up the mating surfaces on the block to start putting our head gaskets on, and of course getting our head gaskets installed, torqued, the whole 9 yards. So as we start to make more and more progress to hopefully getting this engine at least put back together and enough of a state that we can do an initial startup on it and kind of go from there. In case you're wondering what I'm kind of, the noises here in the background, just to show you, yes, I did order 2 of these just in case, so we have a spare. I am going to make a second parts video that will again include the part number of this seal, as well as several other bolts that have come in and a couple other seals that have come in that were not in the first video, just so the individuals that are kind of looking to do this same process will have a pretty good, hopefully a pretty good and usable repository of part numbers. With that being said, we'll bring you back when we get to the next piece. Talk to you in a bit. And welcome back. So you can see we're back on the block this morning. What we're going to do is we've been soaking this down off and on for the last couple of days in WD-40, just trying to loosen up the remaining bits of carbon. A lot of this looks like it's just stained in color. As long as I get the sealant and the big crusty stuff off of it, I'll be happy with that. It doesn't look like there's too terribly much to scrub off on either side, as you can kind of see there. But we're going to concentrate a little bit on that this morning. Then when we get ready to put the, we'll go ahead and get our lifters prepped and get them installed into our bores. Once we have that done, then we'll get the head gaskets on, and then we'll see about getting the heads reinstalled. But the first thing I'm going to do, and you can kind of see the collector attachment point down there for the cat, is I'm going to see if I can push that exhaust back just a wee bit to kind of get it out of our way. That way, as we're maneuvering and trying to get the head to line up, we're not potentially getting ourselves caught up on those collectors, because that's what was happening to me on the 6.4 that we were working on. And once I finally just dropped that assembly to kind of the ground and kind of had it out of the way, it made it a bit easier to get the heads in, because with that brake booster removed, you do have a lot more room on this driver's side to get this head in and out. So what it looks like we're going to have to do is, come in from the bottom underneath these air conditioning lines and maneuver that head in place and kind of seat it down in. And the passenger side, you got a little bit more room to work with here, as you can see there. We'll just have to be mindful of kind of, we'll just zip tie this wiring harness probably up here just to pull it out of the way. Again, just looking to get ourselves as much room as we can so we can get those heads installed. A little bit more of a pain to do it in the truck, because you got to step up into the engine bay to do it, versus the car implementations where you can kind of lean down over the hood and just set the heads in place. But we'll see what happens when we get there, and then when we're ready to get the heads installed, we'll bring you back. Thank you much. Bye. And welcome back. So you can see by the surface here, we did go over this with a little bit of red Scotch-Brite, and for some of the areas that weren't staining, like they had like a noticeable lip to them or material, I sprayed it down with a WD-40 and went over it really, really lightly with a carbide scraper. And you got to be careful using a carbide scraper, because you don't want to gouge the surface. And just kind of took it and just, again, didn't go back and forth or up and down with her back and forth, but just kind of kept it at a backwards dragging angle. again, just to help break up some of the stuff that was, you know, again, you can kind of run your finger over it and tell where it was sealant and not necessarily staining. So we kind of did go over that. You know, it's not perfect. Again, there are some areas there still look like they're stained, but we did get the majority of the chunky bits off well enough that when you run your finger over it, you know, it feels flat. It feels like it'll surface. And we've got a little bit more work to do on this yet, but what I'm doing right now is just going through with our compressed air and blowing out the bolt holes for the head bolts, because they will accumulate gunk as you're doing this. And just to give you an idea, you see all the oil on this rag, all of that shot out of that bolt hole right here on the driver's side. These Hemi bolts do not go into a water passage. They actually just go into blind holes, if I remember correctly. So you don't want any oil or any water or grit down in there, because it'll, one, it may prevent you from, you know, getting your head bolts in and torqued, and two, it could throw off your torque reading, because, you know, water won't compress. Or what'll happen is you'll get a bunch of water or oil down in the bottom of the bolt hole, and as you're tightening it up, it could A, throw off your torque reading by making you think it's tight, or B, compress enough to, you know, potentially crack that particular part of the block in or cause some other damage. So we're just going through again, you know, blowing them out with some compressed air to get all the oil and gunk out of them. I'm gonna do a little bit more work yet on this mating surface that you see. I see a couple more areas that look like to be a little bit of raised gasket, old gasket material, and not just staining. So, but you can see kind of how it's coming along. Once we get this taken care of, and we got all our cleaning done, I'll go through and blast the bolt holes out one more time. Again, just looking to get all of this kind of stuff out of there. And then we did buy a tap per ARP for these size bolts, and we'll go through and run a tap down these bolt holes again, just to help further clean the threads of what we can do. But we're gonna continue to clean on this, and then we'll bring it back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So I just want to kind of show you what I'm doing here when I'm cleaning up this cylinder surface. And I kind of found the best thing to use to tell whether it's a flat spot or a high spot of something that still needs to be removed is just an old-fashioned paint scraper. And spraying the area down with a little bit of our friend, the old WD. All I'm doing is coming in here, keeping the scraper flat up against the surface, not trying to gouge the face or anything, and just lightly going over these areas right here. And when you're going over this, what I'm finding is you can tell when it's flat versus an area that you hit that's still old sealant. So when I run across an area, I'm just working it with the WD-40 and the scraper like this until that area, obviously, until it feels like there's no more of that sealant left. And then kind of what we're left with is a little bit of a darker area, but what that is at that point is just staining. And yeah, you could get kind of a sanding disc out here and sand that and get it looking completely nice, like nice and polished steel, but that's not what I'm going for here. I just want to get all the old gasket off of here so we can put the new one on here and be good to go. So this is what I'm doing. I'm going to continue to work on these cylinder heads, like this area right here. You can see, like, I can go over this water passage in one fell swoop. Again, just kind of keeping this flat to the surface, not at an angle, not trying to gouge it, just kind of keeping it flat to the surface, and then going over this area. Oop, sorry, there's a wasp. He's paying me a visit. Come on, get out of here. Get out of here. Okay, what were we back to? So, before we were rudely interrupted by somebody trying to make a home, let's see. You can see what I'm doing there. Again, just kind of keeping it flat, going over these areas. And if I hit an area where obviously it isn't flat and you'd be able to tell, again, just kind of working it like that. And I'm going to work on this a bit more, and then we're going to do the other side, and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So I just want to show you what I'm doing with this tap here. And let me get you that part number. This is just from ARP. I'm sure you can pick a tap of your choosing. So this is an M12 by 1.50 thread cleaning chaser. And so I shouldn't say, well, yeah, I shouldn't say tap. I should say it's a thread chaser. And yeah, I don't have the T-bar on it. I'm just using a 9mm socket. But as you can see, now that we've got some compressed air through here and we blew all the gunk out of our holes, you can see how easy that thread chaser threads right into that bowl hole. So I'm just running these down to about that far and then backing them out. And all I'm doing this for is to clean any gunk or sand or debris or anything else that may have gotten down inside of this bowl hole after we've gotten the compressed air through it. The other ones on the driver's side were all fine. So I'm gonna go through and do the rest of this for the other 9 remaining bolts, and then I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see that we got our cleaning done, or at least the bigger chunks of the areas where, you know, you could feel that it was sealant and not cylinder block. Some of that leftover is just staining. It doesn't look you know, like a pristine machined cylinder block surface, and that's fine. But there are various other methods online, if you're curious, that show using like low, very fine grit roll-lock disc. Like one's a white roll-lock disc. It looks like a bunch of fingers hanging off of it, that other individuals have used in conjunction with an air tool to kind of go over the surface and prep it, and that works quite well. But you know, for what we're doing here, I think we've got the majority of what we needed complete. What I'm doing now is just prepping the bores to put the lifters in, and I just used our oiling can with some engine oil and thoroughly shot you know, 3 or 4 shots down each lifter bore. Again, we're assembling the engine. You can't have enough lube, in my opinion. I just want to show you this here. So there's our lifters. If you remember, this is a eBay purchase, but they are OEM part numbers. We were able to verify that. And just remember, if you're putting MDS lifters back in, there's a good note here that the MDS lifters are cylinders 1, 4, 6, and 7. So these lifters have to be put in accordance. So the MDS lifters are the ones you see there that have the hole in them where that pin gets depressed so it can deactivate it, and that's just a solid lifter. So your lifters with your holes have to go into cylinders 1, 4, 6, and 7. And on these holders, I can show you this here, you'll notice that says MDS front. So you'll have 2 that'll say MDS front, you'll have 2 that'll say MDS rear, just to help you kind of locate as to where those need to go. So we're going to take our front ones and we'll put one group into cylinder. We'll make sure our MDS lifters are in cylinder 1, and then 4 would be our other one, and then 6 and 7 should be our rears. Yeah, that'll be it, because this will be cylinder 1 driver side, cylinder 4 passenger side, cylinder 6 driver side, and then cylinder 7 passenger side. So 1, 4, 6, and 7. Just again, just got to make sure that the MDS cylinders are the ones that get the lifters with the holes in them. And we're going to thoroughly soak them down in more engine assembly lube, same stuff we use when we put the camshaft in, and then we'll get those torqued down. And I believe, let's see if it says, yeah, it does say to tighten those to 105 inch-pounds for the bolt on that holder. So we're going to go ahead and looks like 105 inch on both. Yeah, looks like both front and rear. Okay, makes sense. So same torque specs. So we're going to go ahead and get these installed, and then we'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So just want to show you quickly what I'm doing here. So we've got our first set of lifters in using an MDS front, with the MDS lifters into the bores for the number 1 cylinder. And the number 1 cylinder is at top, that you can see there from when we set our timing. So now we've got a rear set of MDS lifters, and you can see that little arch in the carrier is going to point towards the top where our mounting bolt is affixed. But remember, we're on the driver's side. So driver's side is 1, 3, 5, and 7, with the number 7 cylinder being towards the back. So we need to make sure that we install these, that those lifters with those holes go into the number 7 set of lifter bores in the back. So it's actually going to go like this. That'll be the direction they get installed in the engine, with this little hump piece up at the top. So that'll put those rear lifters you see with holes in line with number 7. So this will be number 5 cylinder here, which has the fixed lifters, and number 7, which will be our MDS. So you can see that we've kind of already got these snotted down. And what I'm doing is I'm putting assembly lube. I'm dropping assembly lube inside the little area right below each of the rollers, as well as dribbling a fair amount on the outside of the lifter bodies themselves. Again, just thoroughly snotting everything down before we install it, so everything's got the best chance of survival on startup. So I'm going to get the rest of these installed. We're going to get them torqued down, and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. Okay, and we're back. We've got our lifters installed and torqued down. And yes, I know the rule of thumb that if you didn't see it, it didn't happen, but trust me, we did it. We got all 4 of our lifter holders torqued down to 106 inch-pounds per the diagram. We went ahead and spun our crank a couple of times just to clear out any residual garbage that may have been inside the cylinders. And as you can see there, we wiped the cylinders down and put a fresh coat of oil in them. And then we took a little bit of brake clean on top of just a paper towel. You can see kind of some of the crud that still came off the block of the surface, and just wipe down the area where the head gasket's going to go, just to remove any residual oil or debris that may have still been on that surface. And with that being said, I made a little bit of a boo-boo, or what almost was a boo-boo. Now, if you remember earlier, we put our timing setup in. We went ahead and put our tensioner in, or sorry, our guide and our tensioner. And if you remember me telling you that takes up enough slack in the chain that you could actually unbolt the phaser, and the phaser shouldn't fall off. It should kind of hold itself into position. Now, when I rotated the cylinder, I didn't think about it. I forgot that we hadn't pulled the pin on our tensioner yet. So there's still a little bit of slop in the chain. And I'm rotating the engine over, cleaning out the cylinder bores, getting the crud out of them, and kind of re-oiling them, as we said earlier. Then I realized that pin hadn't been pulled. So there was a real chance that lower sprocket could have moved a tooth, but actually, with this in there and that in there, even though the tensioner wasn't in place, it held the chain in enough where it didn't slip on that gear, because as soon as I turned that bottom crank, obviously everything was moving. And in order to verify it, I did get a bore scope out and looked behind the piston and made sure the dot was where it needed to be when the top crank was where it needed to be. Because if you see right now, even though our timing marks aren't there, if you look at where we have our timing mark, we're pointing straight up, and you see where our number 1 cylinder's at. Number 1 cylinder is at top dead center, where it should be. So that tells me that we're still in time between here and there, and turning that crank, even though I forgot to take the pin out of the tensioner, albeit could have been an issue. It looks like, again, just having this in place with no tension on it was enough to hold the chain on there and keep me from making a mistake. So with that being said, learn from my mistakes. Before you turn this engine over for the first time and you've got everything in time, make sure you pull the pin out of your tensioner before you move it, which we do have here. We do have the pin now pulled out of our tensioner. And again, like I said, you can see our timing mark there, straight up where it needs to be. And you can see where our number 1 cylinder is at. So we're still where we need to be as far as our timing is concerned. But like I said, we got our lifters in, everything lubed up, everything torqued. We got our mating surfaces for our gaskets wiped down, a little bit of brake clean, and we went ahead and cleaned up and wiped down the cylinders and gave them just a fresh coat of engine oil. Now, one thing to note, and it's up to you, but you see that square passage in the block, both on driver and passenger side heads, that little square? That is a blind water jacket. It doesn't go anywhere. It actually dead ends. So before you put your heads on, you might want to clear that out. because if you can see that, that's the crud that came out of both those tops. And again, because it's a blind cooling jacket, all the sediment and just everything that's inside that cooling, that could have been inside that cooling system, just settled back there inside those holes, because again, it doesn't flow anywhere. But again, just a thought for you, you may want to, you know, clean those out while you got access to it. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and grab some head gaskets and a head, and we'll see if we can get this driver's cylinder head in here first. And then when we get to that point, I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our cylinder heads installed along with our cylinder head gaskets. The gaskets fit okay. They're all right. They're not the they don't fit as flat as an OEM does. They kind of buckle a little bit, but it is multi-layered steel, so it's going to have a little bit of that effect. But you know, once you get the cylinder heads in place, it seems to flatten out okay. So you can see here that we've got right now they're just resting on the dowel pins, and there's a single bolt just kind of hand tight in there to hold them in place. And what we're going to do is put the rest of the bolts in, start getting them torqued down so that we can start putting our push rods and everything back in at this point. Once we get our push rods in, then we'll torque down our phaser bolt, again with a little bit of Loctite, and then we'll rotate the engine over a few times and just verify that we see all of our valves actuate. And then we can go ahead and start putting the intake and all the other little bits and pieces back on. So with that being said, I did get factory head bolts for this one. I tried to get ARP head bolts like we did on the 6.4, but unfortunately they're unobtainium until I think sometime maybe possibly at the end of August. So we just did the OEM bolts for now, which are, oh, let's see, a cart full of mess. See if I can get you a part number here. There we go. And did get 20 of these because it's 10 bolts per side. And there is a torque sequence with this. And when we get ready to torque these down, I'll bring you back for that. But like I said, like you saw us do earlier, and this is the reason why we did this, is that we used that compressed air to blow any residual oil or water that had accumulated down in those threads out. And then we also used the thread chaser and went down each of them just to make sure, again, there wasn't any debris in there. So because you don't want to get to this step, go to try to put a bolt in and hit some kind of obstruction and then have to take it all back apart again. So that being said, let's get these in there and we'll get ready to torque them down. We'll bring you back. Talk to you in a bit. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our heads in at this point, bolts in and torqued to spec. And there's your spec sheet. So we're looking at bolts 1 through 10. So they wanted a 25 foot-pound pass, then a 40 foot-pound pass, and then finally rotate them 90 degrees. And thankfully the torque wrench I have will do degrees. It is digital. And what it does is, as you get up to the 90 degree mark, it displays the final torque for you in foot-pounds. And some of these, just like we saw in Reignited's video when he was doing it, some ended at 100, some were 101, some were 104. They kind of varied a little bit, but my understanding that's normal. And you can kind of see one of the bolts down in there that we hit it with a silver Sharpie as we got all the passes done. And the top bolts, these smaller, and I think these are like 8 or 10 millimeter, one of the two. Looks like they want you to bring those to 25 foot-pounds. So like I said, we've got it in, we've got them torqued at this point. What we can do now is work on getting the push rods in and the rocker arms in, getting the rocker arms torqued down, and then we'll continue on with the next step. So we're going to go get those pieces and we'll bring you back once we got those installed. Talk to you in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. A little bit of an update. You can see that we've got our rocker shafts, or rocker arm shafts, whatever you want to call them, in place at this point. And I'm sorry, rocker arm assemblies per the manual. Intake and exhaust on this side have been installed. And so I just want to show you here that when you're putting your push rods in, and you push on them, you'll feel them engage the lifter, and it may even push the lifter in a little bit depending on where the cam lobe position is in relation to the lifter. So that's a pretty good indication that you can use to get make sure that it's engaged like it's supposed to be. So what I'm going to do is, like I said, I'm going to get to work on putting the intake and rocker shafts on the passenger side here. And just to show you, they're calling for 16 foot-pounds to torque these two. And there is your torque sequence for the rocker arm assemblies. So I'm gonna get to work on the passenger side, and I'll bring you back when it's done. Thank you much. Okay, I wanted to go a little bit more in depth on this. In case you're having trouble figuring out, which push rod, well, the longer push rods are your exhaust push rods, the shorter ones are the intake. But in case you're having trouble figuring out which hole to go into to get it to line up with the right lifter, what you can do is kind of what we did here on the passenger side, is that we've just loosely installed and just put the bolts in by a couple threads on this particular exhaust rocker arm, and put the levers on the valves, or the actuators on the tops of the valves. And you can see that in this case, in order for it to reach into this cup, you can see that hole there is in line with that arm. So that tells us that is where your exhaust push rod goes. And your intake push rod is, you can see, will be right next to it. I'll grab a short one. So this is the shorter intake push rod. And you can see it's going to go in that the uppermost hole. So it looks like on the passenger side here, the uppermost hole, your intakes, the lowermost hole on each cylinder is going to be your exhaust. And on the driver's side here, let me get some light in here because it is hard to see whenever I figure out what I did with my shop light. Let's see here. Yep, shop light, thank you. Okay, so on this side you can see that once again the intakes are on the hole that is slightly upper, and the exhaust on the one that is slightly lower. So again, just to compare that to the passenger side here, and again you can see exhaust is on the lower one, intakes on the upper one. So, and again, also keep in mind, just a reminder, that the exhausts are the longer push rods and the intakes are the shorter ones. And when you're putting these in, you may run into situations, depending on where the cam lobe is in relation to the lifter, that it may not be, it'll seem like there's not enough meat or slack, or isn't close enough, or maybe you have one that doesn't want to seat correctly. In other words, there'll be a gap. It won't actually sit in the cup. And so what you kind of have to do is start to tighten down your rocker arm and following your torque sequence, which again is right there. And as it draws it down to the cylinder head, it'll take up that gap. So what I like to do is, what we're doing here is putting in the rocker arm shafts one at a time. And then as I'm tightening these bolts up, I'm making sure that these push rods get aligned and seat inside these cups. So it takes a little bit of finagling with it to get it, but you can do it without having to have that special tool that, holds all the push rods in place for you. But like I said, we're gonna get working on this, and I'll bring you back when it's done. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see here that we haven't torqued it down yet, but we do have our exhaust push rods all seated into the corresponding arms. And the exhaust ones are easier to do because you can see fully around it and verify everything is seated. The intake ones are a little bit more difficult because they're a little bit obstructed, because you can see here, this is the intake one for the driver's side. You can't really see it, so what you have to do is just kind of reach around there and feel and make sure that push rod is seated into that actuator, or into that valve rocker. Except it's not too terrible because you can reach all of them, but just to let you know, the visual is not as good as it is on the exhaust side of it. So we're going to continue forward. Once we get the intake rocker arm in here, we'll get this side torqued down, and then we'll bring it back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our intake and exhaust rocker arms on both sides installed, torqued. What we're going to do next is, how we talked about earlier, is that we're just going to rotate the crank a little bit and just verify that we have actuation in all of our valves. And as long as we do, and as long as they're doing what they're supposed to do, and we don't feel any binding or anything hanging us up, then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and take our phaser bolt back out, put a little bit of Loctite on it, and then we'll torque it. And per the book, is asking for 63 foot-pounds on that bolt, which ironically is the same torque that the 6.4 manual is asking for its phaser. So that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to go ahead and take this tie wrap off here because it's no longer needed. Remember, it was just holding up the windage tray while we got the back half installed. And then we're going to make sure we're going to keep rotating the engine until that we verify that both valves for all 8 cylinders are actuating and that we're not feeling any binding. So we're going to take care of that, and then we'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So once again, just to show you the part number of the timing cover gasket, and this is put out by, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. You saw us in a previous section of this clip clean this timing cover up and put a new crank seal in place. We went ahead and just put the new timing cover seal in place that you just saw the part number for. What we're going to do next is we're going to get a couple beads of silicone squirted down in each corner, and then we're going to set our timing cover in place and put the rest of our oil pan bolts and then our timing cover bolts in place. Now the timing cover bolts have a torque spec of, let's see, there it is, sorry, 250 inch-pounds. And you see a note down here, the large lifting stud is torqued to 40 foot-pounds. We didn't remove that lifting stud, it's still in the cover. There wasn't any need to remove it. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to get the silicone in there. We're going to get our timing cover on. We're going to get our bolts installed, which, if you remember, we were talking about this earlier. You've got 2, 4, 6 of these, or I should say 5 of these bolts, which are all the same size. And you've got this special one here that's got the shoulder on it. This is the one that goes in that upper corner where that metal sleeve was located. This is the smaller bolt that goes in that little hook that is on the driver's side cylinder head. Now I'll show that to you here when we get our cover in place, but just to show you that again, that shoulder bolt, that's your shoulder bolt, and it goes right there up in the corner where that metal spacer is located. So I'm going to work on getting this timing cover in place, and then I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So if you remember, when we took the timing cover off, the upper left-hand side upper corner bolt was missing, and I bought a replacement. Now the threads are okay about 90% of the way down into the block, but there's just a lot of crud and stuff in there from years of that bolt being missing. So what I'm going to do here, because I can get the bolt to thread on about 90% of the way with no issue. So I'm going to shorten this bolt a little bit because this bolt is more than long enough than what's needed to get down in there. So I just put a thread chaser on it, as you can see here at the beginning, and I'm going to cut off where you kind of see me have already started. I'm going to cut off from there and then back the thread chaser off to fix the threads, and that should, in theory, allow us to use just a little bit of a shorter bolt. Now it won't have this rounded edge on it that you see there, but I think we'll still be okay. But anyway, we're going to give this a shot, and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. Bye. And welcome back. So you can see that it did work. We do have our bolt in just by shortening that a little bit so it didn't go all the way in to where that bad section of thread was. Now this, it did tighten up, it did draw the valve timing cover in, which is exactly what we were looking for. We got our remaining 5 bolts in to our oil pan, which go into the timing cover. We need to get the two bolts that go through the compressor and anchor into the cover in place. And this short little stubby bolt here, if you remember, goes in that little black reinforcement little claw arm looking there that came off the driver's side cylinder head. So we're going to go ahead and thread that one in. We just got to get them tightened up. All right, perfect. And again, admittedly, like I said, it probably wasn't the best way to handle that by shortening that bolt. The proper way would have been to get a thread chaser in there and clean out that board that went into the block all the way, but I don't have a thread chaser long enough to get in there, even if the timing cover wasn't in the way. So we got quite a bit of thread engagement into the block, so I'm happy with that. And like I said, it did tighten down and snug up, so that's it. It works for me, I guess is what I'm going to say. I'm going to get the 2 bolts for the compressor and put those into the timing cover. And I think the last thing that we will do in this video, as well as for the day, is going to be putting this new ground strap in. Let me get it up here in the light so you can see it a bit better. There we go. So that's the part number for the ground strap. And if you remember, there's a ground strap that tied the 2 heads together and tied into the body ground, and you can see it right there dangling. And you remember it was almost completely tore in half, which is why we're going to replace it. Grounds on a vehicle are extremely important, especially nowadays with everything being computer driven and everything running off sensors. Bad grounds will cause a lot of havoc and just weird stuff to occur. That's why we are going to replace it. But once again, that's the part number. It just clips onto the chassis via that clip there, and then bolts into the back of the cylinder head, and with the 2 bolts we took off when we removed them. So we're going to go ahead and take care of that. We're going to get the timing cover torqued down, get that ground strap on, and we'll call it for a video now. And then when we come back, we'll see about getting the intake put on, getting the valve covers on and in place, finished up. And then I think the last thing we'll do after we get the wiring in, then we'll have to get the radiator in, get a vacuum drawn on it, get it filled full of coolant, get it filled full of engine oil, and then finally put the front diff back into position, which, yeah, again, it's going to be probably just as fun as it was to take it off as to put it back on. But like I said, we got a lot done today, but we got a lot more to do before we're ready to start it. But I'll cut it at this point, and I'll bring you back for the next one. Thank you much.